Concentration camps arrive by different routes. In some cases, a military coup relies on immediate and broad crackdowns. In others, elected officials slowly make certain categories of human beings illegal in the country before resorting to vast roundups. And I've talked before about the concentration camp tendency being a process, and many events have to take place in a society long before mass detention actually begins.
There's a right way and there's a wrong way.
And what happens in the middle of that process has predictable patterns too. In each case, whatever the existing legal system was gets worse as it warps and buckles under the pressure of extrajudicial processes and detention that become the dominant mode in the country. Another shift in the middle stage of that process is that the rising extra-legal police state entrenches itself. Even if the country had police state aspects before, those aspects will expand and institutionalize in ways both familiar and new, taking on additional powers and using violence in places or against people that might have been exempt before. In an actual concentration camp regime, the machinery of abduction and detention at some point develops a large enough bureaucracy and budget that it no longer relies on individual malice at the top.
Damn straight.
That had to move mountains in order to create it in the first place.
We'll now go to Representative Shelley Pingree from Maine.
We're just coming off the floor after the most ridiculous vote. The Republicans voted in a party line vote on this reconciliation bill to give another $70 billion to ICE and CBP. Now remember, in their big ugly bill, they gave them $140 billion, and this bill has no guardrails.
While that malice can certainly be applied to make it worse going forward, the system that was created by it in the first place no longer needs it just to function on a daily basis.
And tonight, we're going back into the appropriations bill for Homeland Security, and they're going to get even more money. In fact, they have enough money in that bill to add an additional 41,500 detention beds.
We are now solidly in that middle state and moving closer to the back end of the span of time in which we can shut down the process.
You can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else, but we live in a world, in the real world, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power.
Today I want to look at flock cameras. I want to consider electric shock gloves. I want to look at an airline contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars that may well have a sidecar of international detention facilities attached to it. I want to sit a moment with what it actually means to impose a policy of ankle monitors on Haitian refugees in Springfield, Ohio. So today I'll address how the police state in the U.S. is metastasizing and institutionalizing in ways that we can act against now, but which will become harder and harder to uproot if they aren't institutionally constrained soon.
According to an internal government document, the planned deportation operations could focus in part on the thousands of Haitians who live and work in the city of Springfield.
I want to give some historical and specific examples of how those processes evolve locally.
We go to Springfield, Ohio, where we're joined by Viles Dorsenville. He is the co-founder and executive director of the Haitian Support Center in Springfield and is among the over 300,000 Haitians in the U.S. who've just lost their TPS, temporary protected status.
And internationally,
I always tell people that it's not a question of us not willing to go back to our country. We have an international airport that has not been in operations for over the past 2 years. We have more than 1.3 million people who have been displaced, and 5 million people are in acute food insecurity. So there are women and girls who live in shelters on a daily basis, people who are being raped, exposed to rape.
And I want to consider what might be effective resistance.
You at this point believe it's up for Congress.
Yeah, it's up for Congress now if they want to support the community.
Vote for persons who are seeking the change that you want to see.
So to start, I'm going to look briefly at two very different mid-process historical cases from international developments in concentration camp detention. Because most Americans know only about Nazi or maybe Russian camp systems, I'm going to choose two examples from the Americas, both of which have ties to the United States.
I'm very pleased to welcome you to this evening's event with Andrea Pitzer, presenting her book, One Long Night.
So the first example I'll turn to is the mass production in Pittsburgh of Barbed Wire by Oliver Brothers in the 1890s.
The reason I also started, not just when the phrase begins, but in that moment in time in 1896, is because there's also a role that technology plays that's very important.
As you may recall from prior episodes, many, but not all, historians consider the first example of modern concentration camps to have taken place in Cuba in the late 19th century.
The modern experiment in preemptively detaining groups of civilians without trial was launched by two generals, one who refused to bring camps into the world and another who did not.
The Spanish Empire was trying to put down a rebellion by Cubans that had become chronic across decades.
Rather than embark on a policy of deliberate atrocity, Arsenio Martinez Campos, the man who thought concentration camps the only road to victory, refused to embrace them. I cannot, he wrote, as the representative of a civilized nation, be the first to give the example of cruelty and intransigence. So Martinez Campos was recalled. A man whose nickname was the Butcher was sent in his stead, and the first concentration camps came into the world.
In 1896, under wartime conditions, the man leading the Spanish military in their efforts, General Valeriano Weyler, decreed that civilians in several contested regions had to evacuate their homes and move behind barbed wire into fortified towns and cities.
The United States, there was a lot of coverage of this, and there were pictures of starving, dying children.
Little to nothing in the way of accommodations was available in those towns, and there was even less planning or capacity to grow food.
Millions of tons of aid were sent by rail and then by boat to Cuba to help the starving reconcentrados. And this was a key factor in triggering, after the Mainz explosion, the U.S. entry into the Spanish-American War.
There was also no opportunity to leave, as barbed wire had been used to divide the country and to not only keep the rebels out, but also to keep the peasants who had been forcibly relocated trapped.
After defeating Spain handily, we inherited the Philippines, where there was also a rebellion underway, and we ended up using concentration camps ourselves in that conflict.
Dividing up the country into multiple sectors with barbed wire reinforced routes and barbed wire reinforced towns, as you might imagine, takes a lot of metal.
Barbed wire was mass produced in the 1870s and patented in the 1870s, so it existed before then, but it really came into high production then.
And you might ask yourself, where on the island of Cuba, on terrain paralyzed by war with resources in short supply, could the Spanish Empire come up with so much barbed wire? The answer is in the United States. The enormous behemoth corporation run by the Oliver Brothers produced this barbed wire in Pittsburgh.
It's going to take a lot of people to hold these people. Turns out if you order a whole bunch of barbed wire from Oliver Brothers in Pittsburgh, you don't have to have that many people.
In early 1897, in the middle of a raging guerrilla conflict, Oliver Brothers shipped out 2 million pounds of barbed wire. 1,000 tons of the stuff to help Spain put down the rebellion.
150,000 Cubans were killed in the Spanish camps. No mass executions were necessary.
The U.S. was only 14 months from declaring war on Spain, and William McKinley, the President of the United States, was less than 10 months from declaring the Spanish policy of massed, forced relocation behind barbed wire to be horrific. As he put it, it was not civilized warfare, it was extermination.
The only peace it could beget was that of the wilderness and the grave, he said.
So how did the U.S. come to supply the means by which to carry out Reconcentración? In the middle of war, just months before that same policy would be condemned at the highest levels of U.S. government? The deal was arranged by Señor Depuy de Lome, then Spain's ambassador to the United States. I would like to note a few items about this delivery. First, the means of warfare and the means of detention were both framed as being protective by the Spanish authorities at the time. Much of the expansion of both the detention and war was conducted by those who would profit from it directly. and those businesses often operated entirely outside the orbit of any kind of government control, even in a country with leadership ostensibly opposed to both the war and the mass detention itself. All this is a cautionary tale. And I'll talk more in a bit about who is producing the means of detaining people in camps and violence against civilians in and outside those facilities today. But the other historical case I want to think about before we get to that isn't about the origins of the material tools used to harm or detain people, but instead about the origins of the ideas of how to harm.
Augusto Pinochet's dictatorship was one of the most terrifying and violent periods of Chilean history. Thousands of citizens were murdered, were tortured. This was the period when that ominous word, the disappeared, emerged.
Because those have their own production lines and distribution as well.
We were detained by the police and taken to the Ministry of Defense and, treated quite roughly, and eventually to the National Stadium where they were concentrating people from all parts of Santiago.
When I interviewed Felipe Agüero about his detention and torture in the Estadio Nacional in Santiago, Chile in 1973, he described various kinds of premeditated violence committed against the detainees. One of them that his interrogators inflicted on him was electrical torture, in which he was told to strip and lie down. Wires were attached to his wrists and his testicles. As his captors demanded answers to questions, they turned on the switch to the circuit that his body had become part of, shocking him.
One thing to understand about Pinochet's economic policies is they went hand in hand with the repression.
It's an obscene form of torture, combining terror with physical trauma and the violence of co-opting the body to take part in harming itself.
Chile was about something far, far different. It was about shrinking the state to invisibility. So pensions were privatized, education was privatized, health was privatized. They privatized everything they could.
Where had these interrogators learned such inhumane tactics?
His economic policies were carried out by a group of technocrats known as the Chicago Boys. They were economists who trained under Milton Friedman in the Chicago School of Economics. This meant policies of drastically cutting public spending, reducing the state, privatization. It was really sort of a shock therapy for the economy.
One possible source is Paul Aceres, who had been an advocate as well as an apologist for torture by French forces during Algeria's fight for independence from France in the 1950s and early 60s.
The book caused a scandal last May. General Auxerre recounted in detail the torture and summary executions in which he participated during the Algerian War.
A former French army general who joined the Free French forces during World War II, he also embraced torture against Algerians a decade later.
Today, the Paris criminal court sentenced him to a fine of €7,500, a conviction to set an example, a symbolic sentence. General Auxerre, who has always defended his practices because, according to him, they were necessary, has decided to appeal.
After moving to Brazil in 1973, he advised military dictatorships in several South American countries on methods of torture, one of those countries being Chile.
Do these executions weigh on you? No. Why? Because I have only executed perpetrators of criminal acts.
Through this route, what was known as la parrilla in Chile, the grill, may have had origins tied to the earlier use of the jejen, a nickname for the generatrice, a hand-cranked generator common in the first half of the 20th century. And where did the French in Algeria come up with the jejen? Why, in their police forces at home in France. While an early form of electric torture had been used by the French in Indochina previously, the first known use of it in France itself was during World War II by a French traitor who was fighting the resistance. Part of a group known as the French Gestapo, and one-time top policeman in Toulouse, Pierre Marty is thought to be the person who brought electric torture to France. So small wonder it found its way to Algeria in the years that followed. High-level government instruction has surely played a role in the introduction of new tactics, but Darius Rejali, the author of Torture and Democracy, suggests that high government level instruction may be less important than what happens on the ground. His research suggests that torture is passed interrogator to interrogator, locally, as a craft. What is allowed on one particular site is shared when that torturer goes to the next place. What gets innovated is passed along. Why talk about this nasty history? In the middle stages of concentration camps, a system often goes from chaotic sadists.
You can talk all you want about international niceties and everything else, but we live in a world, in the real world, Jake, that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power.
To developing a corps of professional torturers.
July 1st, we bring it back up. We had to rewrite the curriculum. All training starting July 1st will be back up to the regular standards.
They learn not to leave marks while doing harm. This transition from perverts to professional torturers is a common one and a key step on the path to institutionalizing a camp system.
Everybody fucking gets it if they touch you.
If you think of Gregory Bovino egging on his officers in various U.S. cities at demonstrations against Trump's immigration policies,
The city is a team. Fucking Irish is our fucking city.
you can begin to see how you might need to go from a few high-visibility violent cowboys urging mayhem to something a little quieter.
But I made this very clear that I don't care what color your state is. I don't care if you're red or you're blue. At the end of the day, my job is to be Secretary of Homeland and to protect everybody the same. And we will do that.
His kind of public excess frequently transforms from a system built by active malice, leading to one that can be sustained almost entirely through malicious negligence, one that maintains itself.
No one's going to outwork me, and I'm not going to let any of them outwork me.
With a budget of tens of billions of dollars already secured, with a system that has long existed to do harm to immigrants, much of the groundwork of creating a massive expansion of extrajudicial detention has already been laid.
I love that expression, no one's going to outwork me. That's a wrestler's expression, isn't it? Huh? That's a good wrestler's expression.
The administration now understands, more or less, that if they want this current terror against immigrants to persist and to grow, they need to move more quietly and entrench what they're building.
They want to hand over our nation to illegal aliens.
With the exception of Stephen Miller, most of the apparatchiks under Trump have shifted gears to this quieter mode. But they haven't stopped.
Migrants detained by Immigration and Customs Enforcement have just hit a record high head count under the Trump administration.
And we see those signs of entrenchment outside government offices as well.
New corporations saw a banner 2025 as a direct result of President Trump's immigration crackdown. Core Civic and Geo Group owned private detention centers that house migrants arrested by ICE.
The Oliver Brothers of yesteryear, supplying barbed wire for concentration camps in Cuba, may well have become Eastern Airlines today.
This 737, operated by Eastern Air Express, is one part of a massive ICE air fleet.
Winning what may be as much as a $327 million contract to support ICE air operations.
The network's complexity makes it difficult to understand and oversee.
Huge amounts of funding from the U.S. government are going in with very little oversight.
As Jillian Brackel has reported, the original call for bids asked contractors to include proposals for running detention sites in third countries with beds for up to 1,000 people.
They have progressively moved the planes behind the airport.
We'll see if Eastern is going to end up going into the concentration camp business or not.
Here, we met Chris Harris, part of an informal national network of observers who document the flights.
This month, we've seen pushback to the flock cameras' omnipresent surveillance of civilian life in the U.S.
Flock surveillance cameras, the privately owned nationwide network of cameras used to track the movement of cars based on features like license plate, make, and also model.
Incidences of stalking ex-partners by police officers using the data from the cameras have been reported.
Already dozens of cities around the U.S. have canceled contracts or stopped using flock cameras.
Measures to restrict their use in immigration enforcement are widely seen as insufficient.
A recent report out of Columbus, Ohio, found that more than 15,000 searches have been linked to immigrant enforcement activity.
Recent concessions on the length of time that data that they record is preserved may make a difference, but I am dubious that those restrictions will hold, given that the fundamental nature of the devices relies on and tends toward facilitating a concentration camp society.
Right now, though, they are short of that goal of detaining 100,000 immigrants. They have locked up 70,000. That is still a record number, but it shows you that the administration sees room for growth, and they have the money to be able to actually contract with companies like CoreCivic and GeoGroup.
We see the ankle monitors as well that are now put on Haitians who have lived and worked legally, sometimes for years, in Springfield, Ohio, but have now been criminalized by the sweeping changes to immigration policy.
Those companies, by the way, also making clear they're not just investing in these new detention centers. They are also looking at ankle monitoring services, contracts with ICE to monitor immigrants who have been allowed to go home.
And we see the gloves that give a painful electric shock to those grabbed by the wearer.
The device is called GLOVE, which stands for Generated Low Output Voltage Emitter.
ICE may buy $20 million worth of the gloves, insisting that they will not be used for torture.
The company who makes them demonstrating their power on social media.
But one of their selling points, as with so many past kinds of torture, is that they cause pain but leave no mark.
The ACLU slamming the move, saying giving ICE agents, quote, a concealed means of delivering terrible pain is a recipe for more harm to the public and less accountability.
And given the budgets already allocated, it's difficult to keep all entrenchment from happening. It's just the stage we're at right now. But they are struggling to use that money to create the ever-expanding number of detention beds that they want. Why are they struggling? Because every time they try a new tactic, it gets shut down, it gets blocked, it gets interrupted, and it ends up with a bad reputation. How is that happening?
ICE activists say they've seen an uptick in agent sightings across the city. And while they may not be able to stop ICE from operating in New York, they say they can pressure businesses they believe are supporting the federal agency.
Through what so many people are doing locally, by turning their towns against forced labor in concentration camps like Delaney Hall in New Jersey, and calling attention to conditions at detention facilities at places like Broadview in Chicago and 26 Federal Plaza in New York.
Protesters say federal immigration officials may have found a place to park at an Icon garage in Tribeca, but not a place to operate unnoticed.
They should move elsewhere or get out of New York City.
They get foiled locally when people resist warehouses, as we've witnessed in recent months.
For the past 20 Wednesday evenings, a loose association of concerned Utahns gathered here to protest what was a planned ICE detention facility. But when word began to filter out that that wasn't likely going to happen, a much different vibe.
Just as torturers on the ground teach their tactics to one another, and someone from the police department might end up working in a detention camp and carrying tactics from one place to the other, we can claw back our culture on the ground locally too.
Now it is a celebration to thank the mayor of Salt Lake City, the mayor of Salt Lake County, all of the activists, all of the people who care.
Organize with local nonprofits. Raise awareness in your community.
New this morning, Home Depot is now responding to allegations after immigrant rights groups accuse the business of helping ICE target workers.
Press your local officials and business owners to stand against profiting off of inhumane and criminal actions. Where they cannot be cajoled, make them afraid of legal consequences later. Document everything.
Every single Home Depot in the Houston area and in other parts of the country have flock cameras. How is this not allowing them to be or to work in collaboration with ICE?
Most people do not approve of actual harm to their fellow human beings. If you can get out the story of what's actually going on, it will be met with by disapproval by a majority of the people in the U.S. And probably more people than you might think, even if you live in a red state. It is tremendously dispiriting that any company would make gear in the first place capable of torturing others and sell it to people who torture other human beings. That can be a hard thing to ponder. It is also dispiriting that some companies are currently submitting bids to build additional ICE detention facilities for massive bonuses on an expedited basis. But it can happen in large part because most people in the U.S. don't realize these processes are underway. The more people who find out, the less popular all this becomes.
President Trump's approval rating has now hit a new low. A new poll finds just 33% of Americans approve of his job performance. That's down 2 points from earlier this month.
None of us can individually be responsible for filling the entire gulf in information created by propaganda, by the dismantling of the U.S. education system and the collapse of journalism nationwide. But just as with the intimate tactics of cruelty and torture passed along at the local level, we can reestablish a culture of respect for every human, institute a refusal to support officials and businesses who profit politically or economically from others' misery, and demand a common decency from our neighbors where we live.
And this is not the first time protesters have demanded a company end its contract with federal officials. If you remember, a few months ago, they demanded an end to ICE parking at Pier 40. That ended at the end of June.
People who get encouraged toward heinous political ideas online or in groups who encourage them to be their worst selves are not highly susceptible to change.
These are the iron laws of the world.
But with a public effort of reframing what's normal or acceptable close to home, change can be possible. We can keep the next Oliver Brothers from taking that contract. We can keep the government from normalizing the next torture device that it would like to use against the most vulnerable among us.
Citizens Bank has severed financial ties to CoreCivic and the GEO Group, two of the nation's largest private prison operators that work directly with ICE to run immigration jails. The National Bank has faced significant pushback from social justice groups and activists for providing more than $2.5 billion in financing to the two private prison companies.
Each thing we stop is a victory and is contagious. And that's it.
Thanks for listening to Next Comes What. Please share this with one person who's looking for ways to survive this mess. To support this podcast, please become a paid subscriber at AndreaPitzer.com and consider giving Next Comes What a 5-star review where you get your podcasts.
As you might imagine, takes a lot of metal. I should say, and not the good kind, but don't put that in the show.